Thank you very much. So welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee being held on Tuesday, the 11th of June, 2024. For those present in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For participants in the room, please use the microphones to speak, pressing the button on the right of the unit. Please speak directly towards the microphone, otherwise your contributions may not be picked up by the live stream. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Only Cabinet members present in the meeting room may vote, and I'm pleased to say we have 100% of people here today. For any virtual participants, just does not apply. So I'll move straight on to the meat of the meeting. First of all, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Bartram. And item 2, I'm pleased to say that Councillor Polly Andrews is substituting for Councillor Bartram. This is your second consecutive meeting, Polly, and I think you've got another 2 coming up after this as well, so we obviously haven't put you off yet. Declarations of interest, that's item 3. Are there any interest to declare? I see none. Passing on then to the minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of March 2024 are included in the agenda, pages 11 to 16. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Show of hands, please. Thank you. Questions from members of the public? There are no questions from the public, and questions from councillors. There are no questions from councillors either. I'd like to especially welcome Councillor Stollard for joining our meeting. Thank you, Peter, for coming along. And we also have a number of other people. We have, just looking at the list. Judith Trammer, welcome to this meeting. Glad you could make it. And we got Cathy Smith. Cathy, you're from Grant Thornton. You're remote. I'm looking for your picture on the screen. Yeah, hi Cathy. Thank you very much for joining. I'm told work has already started on the audit, which is absolutely brilliant news. So thank you very much for that. We look forward to hopefully answering all your questions as quickly and promptly as possible. I know Rachel and Judith will be onto that straight away. So thank you very much. So the first main item on the agenda is the appointments to the standards panel. The papers for this have been presented previously. There's a change to the system, and the request for this meeting is to have some people appointed as standing members to the committee, and we have Councillor Highfield and Councillor Hamlin who've agreed to put themselves forward for that position, and Councillor Oliver and Councillor Cornthwaite are substitute proposals. So if I can put those proposals to the meeting, first of all, I'm being directed to. Yeah, okay. The recommendation is to note the appointment of the chair of the Audit Committee Audit and Governance Committee onto this panel. Secondly, to acknowledge Brian Jones has been nominated as the Parish Council representative, as recommended by HELC. The two councillors I just mentioned as standing members, and the 2 further councillors as substitute members. If I could have a show of hands to agree with those recommendations, please. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Moving on then to item 8, which is the draft annual report of the Audit Committee. I'm very pleased to ask Jen Priest to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. So just to note that the draft annual report has been amended, and there is a supplement to the agenda, so please if you could refer to that. This is the first annual report of the Audit and Governance Committee, which summarises the work of the committee during the last municipal year. This report has been introduced as a recommendation from the LGA and is already being produced by many other councils. It will provide a visible demonstration of how the committee is fulfilling its role and complements the council's objectives of being open and transparent. I invite you to agree the draft report and highlight any adjustments you wish to make before it is published on the council's website.
Great, thank you, Jen. Hopefully, councillors and the public will find this a really helpful introduction. I do plan to send a copy of it to all councillors, so all councillors know what this committee is about and what we're doing. Everything on here has previously been discussed, but I know that Councillor Andrews has a particular issue she'd like to highlight.
Thank you, Chair. I note the paragraph, a theme of service failures was consistently an area of concern this year. It really deals with members of the public having difficulty in getting responses, but I do feel that it should be also said that many councillors also have the same difficulty in getting responses to their queries. In fact, sometimes they're completely ignored. As a long-standing councillor, I'm frequently asked by new councillors, just what do we have to do to get a response? I do remember some years ago there used to be a standard to which there had to be a response of some sort within 5 working days. And I would like you to ask the Chief Executive if he could put this back on to all members of the staff, even if they're just responding to say that we've had your email and we'll get back to you with a fuller response, just to let members of councillors know that their emails and requests have not been completely ignored or forgotten. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody have any other comments on that? Robert?
Yeah, as I said earlier, as I said before in our informal meeting, I'm very impressed with this report, but to go back to what Jen said about the purpose of it, to be open and transparent, and this is why we're doing that this year, our website, our council website, is not open and transparent. It's very difficult to find things on it. I'm already addressing this with the Chief Executive, and there is a team been appointed to try and do something, but I'd just like it noted that in order to be open and transparent, we need to make it possible for the public to access the information through our website much more easier than it currently is. So that, I don't know if that point can be made as part of our need to be open and transparent.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So I guess there are 2 issues. One is about communication from Polly, and rather than being a formal sort of direction to the Chief Executive, perhaps just a request, perhaps from me on behalf of the committee, that he consider sending out a communication to encouraging officers to respond in a timely and appropriate manner to requests, but both to councillors and to members of the public, because we're equally important in these areas. So if that's seems to, yes, Mark, yeah.
Yeah, it's just in the report, if you provide feedback and statistics, feedback, we should usually have something to mitigate that. So in the report, we may ought to consider putting in things of how are we going to respond to feedback, rather than just leave it and say, this is wrong, but then not actually try to answer how to make it right. It just feels like it's unbalanced when you're reading through the report. Thank you. And Robert, to your point, I don't know, Pete, are you just as a cabinet member, I don't know whether you, sorry, a bit of a hospital pass this one.
No problem. Oh, it has me. Oh, thank you. I was expecting Rachel's doesn't go. So, Chair, thank you very much for that. Actually, I'm not here. I'm here in my finance role, but in my corporate services role, which includes ICT and all the other services that Mark and I have chatted about many, many times, I can answer that. So under Thrive, we're very much looking to look at and built in the whole transformation program, where we're trying to make everything more viable and more transparent and more easy. I've sat there yesterday putting 8 road repair issues in. Every time I got kicked out and had to go back in and redo it. So I'm personally very aware that our website's not the most user-friendly, and certainly I will take that as an action on me to speak with the team in ICT to look at that as a priority to get that sorted. as you say, this is now 2024. Our website should be industry standard and user friendly, and I have to say it isn't. So I will take that as a personal action from yourself, Chair,
Yep,
if you're happy, and I'll address that.
Thank you, Pete. Yes.
And could I just add that an example of user-friendly and accessible is the parallel Understanding Herefordshire website, which is really excellent. And if our own council website looked something like that, then we'd be a long way towards the solution.
Yeah. I think I've heard the Chief Executive talk about three clicks for an answer. So you ought to be able to get to your information that quickly, and it just doesn't work at the moment in that way. Pete, do you
No, I quite agree. And Mark will know only too well from his professional days is that it's three clicks is as deep as your information should go. If you've got more than 3 clicks, then you're not designed at optimal level. So I take the point, and I will speak with the ICT team, and we'll look to get that addressed as quick as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll pass the recommendation, and the report I think is agreed as it stands. I will be contacting the Chief Executive and ask that the report is published on the Council's website within 3 clicks. That's item 9, the draft annual governance statement. Rachel, are you introducing this?
Thank you, Chair. Just checking the name has changed. No, it's not been changed yet. That's fine. So this report presents the draft annual governance statement for 23-24. This is a document that the Council is required to publish as part of our statutory accounts. It's a retrospective document which reports on the effectiveness of the governance arrangements and the internal controls that have been in place during the year ended 31st of March 2024. The report is prepared by reference to the 7 core principles of good governance as identified by SIPFA, and the statement identifies the arrangements and activities that have been in place during the year, as well as areas where our arrangements could be strengthened. These areas will form an action plan, and an update on the progress in delivering those actions will be presented to this committee in late autumn. The report is informed by director assurance statements, a review of compliance with laws and regulations, and the work and opinion of both internal and external audit. The document will be tested by our external auditors, Grant Thornton, as part of their audit work over the summer, and the final version will be brought to this committee at the meeting that will be held in September. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Peter? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just go on record to thank Rachel, Andrew and their team for production of these accounts on time. We're in the top 20%? 39% of the counties across the country that have put these in line. And of course, the amount of work in them is significant. And now we wait for the team from Grant Thornton to give the results back in September. But I think the fact that we're in that top third is a good effect for Herefordshire Council. And I'd like again to thank the team for all their hard work.
No, Peter, I second that. It's a great result. It shows what an efficient part of the council we have. So thank you very much. Rachel, you mentioned feedback in the autumn. Jen, can you make sure that goes on the forward plan, please? I'll just make 1 or 2 comments, observations on this. On page 42, and for anybody listening, the page numbers are by reference to the .uk gov website and also the public agenda pack. So there are a number of pages which have different numbers on them. But this is page 42. And it refers to improvements to government arrangements for council business ventures will be delivered in 24-25. Could you possibly explain what we mean? This is the 3rd bullet point on the top left, Rachel. It refers to council business ventures. Could you explain what is meant by that?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I think that refers to the arrangements through the shareholder committee and our governance in respect of those shareholdings, as well as in reference to some of the items that are going to be reported through the internal audit update later.
Great. Thank you very much. I didn't prep you for that question, but that's exactly the answer which I was hoping I was going to get. On the opposite side of that page, the first bullet point report refers to political group consultations, and the wording which came to my attention was the last few words. It says, and ensure transparent political choice for the electorate. And I was trying to work out how that worked through the political group consultation. Is that giving the electorate a choice? It's not really. It's just saying what other groups might be saying. And I'm not totally convinced that all the group leaders feel that the process for political group consultation is working at the moment. So I'd ask that perhaps that wording goes back to the group leaders to ask if they are happy with this wording as it is, then we'd go along with that. But I think there might be some room for changing, and the point is that this is only a draft document, and we've got a number of months in which to make any changes. If you'd like to respond to that, Rachel, as well. Thank you.
Yep, happy to take that away, and we can consider both the wording in that bullet point and whether there's an opportunity to include that in the arrangements that could be strengthened.
Thank you. On page 45, top right, the first bullet point there refers to risk management involves the identification, analysis and control of threats or events that adversely affect the achievement of the Council's strategic and operational objectives. Yes, it also enables positive risks to be taken. And I must confess, I don't quite understand what a positive risk is. I think what it's saying is that risks can be evaluated, and if there's sufficient benefit, then just because there's a risk, we shouldn't not do it. But I wonder whether you could go away and perhaps have a look at that wording as well. Going on to the same paragraph, it refers to the monitoring by the Audit and Governance Committee, and you've already mentioned that's very helpful. On the left-hand side, I just wondered whether it's areas where it's recognised governance and arrangements could be further strengthened. I'm just wondering about the loss of corporate knowledge. We've had to let go of a number of people that they've chosen to go, and there's a big hole created then because that knowledge goes. Are we covering off that risk? Or is that relevant in this governance statement? Core principle is developing the entity's capacity, including the capability of its leadership and the individuals within it. I just wonder, developing our capacity, we lose some of that capacity as a result of people leaving. And I would like some assurance that there is knowledge transfer.
I think that's a really valid question, considering that the changes the Council are going through, and that's a key consideration for corporate leadership team through the workforce strategy and the learning and organisational development colleagues in terms of how we develop that capacity and build some resilience following those departures.
Okay. Pete, yeah. You can come again.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to reassure you that as we were discussing MERS at Cabinet, one of the questions that we raised a number of occasions was exactly that loss of corporate knowledge, and we have Cabinet have been appraised that the information that were in people was all written down prior to them leaving. So it wasn't so much what was on their desktop, it was what was in their heads. As part of that process, they were all actively encouraged, and I believe did write down a lot of those processes and things that are in their heads. So that corporate knowledge has not been fully lost. It's recorded. It's just not automatically in their heads, in individuals' heads, but it has been recorded.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Enough from me for the moment. Anybody? Frank.
So I'd just like to go back to page 38 of the report. There's a lovely wheel there. Some of the writing within it isn't as clear, but my question would be, how do we ensure that this wheel is enforced, and who would be responsible to ensure that when we're looking at any decision, each of those, I think there's 7 points, is actually part of what you've done?
So the report takes each of those 7 core principles, and we outline what activities are currently in place And we've also identified those areas where we think we could improve those arrangements. That will go then into an action plan with specific tasks and an owner for each activity, and that will be brought back to this committee to be monitored in future periods. In terms of the activity that's taken place during the year, our external auditors review this document and the information that we have provided and the references we've made to that activity, and they confirm that they believe that's accurate throughout the year.
Robert.
Could I, in that context, reference Peter's description, the online description of the council plan, which sets out the plan, which is the aspirations, a bit like this wheel, but within those there are links to the specific delivery plan. When I think it displays excellency. So if you want to know, well, how are we going to do that? Bink, you get literally one click and you're there, which lists out how it's to be done. And I thought that was very impressive. So maybe that could be considered as a way of displaying this sort of thing.
We'll certainly take that away and consider it. This document's heavily prescribed in terms of its format, but I think there are ways that we can do that through the action plan that's brought back to this committee and some more interactive links for you.
Good. Frank, thanks for that reminder to start at the beginning of page 38. Any other questions on page 38? Well, we're page 30, page 30, 39. 40, there's not much on 40. Yeah, I just thought I'd get the ball rolling. 41. 42, we've already looked at. The second bullet point on the top left talks about training. We will continue to promote a culture of accountability and strong ethical values through additional training to officers to support the documentation. So I think that's a very good step to have some training in connection with that. I don't think it's for this committee necessarily to ask for all the detail, but it's good that it's mentioned there.
I'd also draw attention back through to the workplace strategy that we chat through with scrutiny management a few weeks ago. That's embedded in there, and it's a case of empowering our employees to be the best they can be. Very much tied in with the vision for the council as well.
Yeah. Good. Page 44. Page 45. Page 46. I put a note here. Polly.
Thank you. It's page 45. I think I commented on this before as a sort of stand-in on this committee. The number of risk registers we seem to run at different levels. And I thought that could well be simplified.
Yes, that's, I think, does that come up in the next page, page 40, 46, in the middle as a bullet point, refers to a review of the council's risk management arrangements to ensure consistency, improved accountability and robust identification. So yes, there is obviously a plan to review the risk management arrangements. Now, I think that this has been quite on the agenda for some time. We've had some changes of personnel. The corporate director responsible for it is in the process of leaving. So I don't know what new arrangements there are for leading this change. Does any, we can ask the question some other time, but
well, obviously, I have mentioned it in this very room a few times about our approach to risk. As a management of risk practitioner, myself, I can say our approach, I think, is logical and sensible. Having been talked through it by Matt Pearce, who is the current owner, I'm comfortable with how the approach is. I think it's logical and sensible, and it works well. One thing that we are keen to see, though, is certainly it's the mitigation steps as you go through, so that they're all applied the same way, rather than individuals who may assess a mitigation step as being amber or red, and someone else may assess it as being green. So we're trying to ensure that the standards for those are clear and understood by everyone. Okay. But I think that the process is good, but certainly with a new director of performance, then we'll look at that again.
So risk will be taken on, moved into that area with that new person who's being appointed. Okay. Fine, I was going to ask when it's likely that we have if there's going to be a refresh, when we're likely to see that. But I think, looking at the risk register, I think it's the next meeting which we look at the risk register and link with external audit.
We'd certainly look to have it as a matter of priority.
Yeah. Pete, one of the sort of nice bugbears, one of the issues I often look at the risk section of officer reports, and I think they vary a lot. You know, they identify a risk, but then don't explain genuinely what the mitigation is. They don't necessarily really work at what is the risk, and really thinking that actually, if I can work out what the risk is, then I can put in place mitigation measures and improve the quality of the decision making. Is that part of what's being embedded in the council now? And can I look forward to reports going to cabinet which will have perhaps what I would consider an improved risk assessment?
As you're aware, Chair, we've tried, myself, you and Matt, to have that face-to-face. It just didn't quite work out over the last 2 months. Certainly, at all levels, we look to improve the quality of our work. We are a continuing improving culture. So certainly I will work with officers to improve that.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else on page 46? Come to page 47, and there is mention here of the dedicated schools grant. So the main, or the chief areas of concern, key focus are children's, which is absolutely right, financial sustainability, and then what is in effect a new one of dedicated schools grant. We haven't had this before, and I think by way of background, I think 2 years ago, the deficit which we were running was something like 300,000, and then it was 1.1 million, and this year it's 5. So from being something where I was delighted to go to other conferences with other local authorities and say, well, you know, we don't have a problem with it. Well, suddenly this is beginning to rear its head, and over the next 2 years, it's obviously going to increase. If it was in the same sort of trajectory, it would be huge. But so this is now mentioned as an issue for us, which we need to be looking out for. I don't know whether Rachel, you want to just give us a little bit of a briefing on what this is all about. We don't want to go into huge depth, but I think we should, the committee members ought to be aware of what this issue is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the council receives funding for schools via the dedicated schools grant. There's an increasing gap between the amount allocated and our expenditure, and that's linked to increasing demand and increasing complexity of need. There's been a statutory instrument in place to allow a special accounting treatment of the cumulative deficit. So as the Chair rightly said, historically this hasn't been a pressure for Herefordshire. 2 years ago the deficit was 0.3, accumulated balance then a year ago was 1.1, it now sits as 6.1, and that's permitted to sit as an unusable reserve in our balance sheet. The statutory override that is in place is until the 31st of March 2026, at which point it becomes a risk to the council. That balance crystallises, and at the present there is no mechanism for that to be resolved, although it is under discussion at the moment as to how that will be resolved. Ours is still a relatively small balance across the country, but it's something that we are managing through our deficit management plan. It's managed as part of the medium-term financial strategy risks, and it's monitored on a monthly basis through our financial budget monitoring and reported to Cabinet quarterly. So in terms of the governance arrangements to monitor this emerging risk, there are some controls in place which are effective.
So the purpose of this committee is to look at those government arrangements. I think we'd be fairly confident they are in place, but that's assuming you have some understanding of the basic issues. So if you've got any questions which we can field quickly, or if you want to follow up with Rachel separately. Robert, thank you.
Yeah, what's an unusable reserve? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not an accountant.
Rachel. Yeah.
So we've got our reserves which we can use. So those are effectively, I suppose, the best way to describe them is pots that we can make use of, we can carry forward between financial periods. The unusable reserves are an accounting technical adjustment. For example, the revaluation reserve is an unusable reserve where we manage the financial transactions to do with movements in property. So this is somewhere to put it on our balance sheet to account for it, but it's not a pot that we can use. It is a negative, yeah, absolutely, it's a deficit.
Peter.
Are there things that can be done to halt the decline? Obviously, you said that the major figure is not crystallised until 2026, I think you said. But in the meantime, is it necessarily going to decline further?
We're forecasting at the moment that it will worsen over the next couple of years, and there are a series of actions identified in the deficit management plan which goes to the schools forum, and those actions are in place to contain those in-year deficits. But it's something that we're working through at the moment, and we're monitoring the risk of that balance increasing.
Peter, I think that's a very good question. You know, what can be done about it? With children's services, we know we can, you know, improve in various areas, and then the risk hopefully will disappear. With this, it's just not possible. I was reading a report this morning. It reckoned that 25% of councils would go bust as a result of this, unless the government takes some action. This is real money, which has to come from central government in order to repay it. Kent County Council, their deficit is 100 million at the moment, and that will be increasing, I don't know, by tens of millions of pounds a year. So, you know, ours is, we're in, as in, actually I'd say in many cases, Herefordshire Council is a very strong position by comparison to others. So, and work has been going on for many years to keep on it. It's not a case of just suddenly it appearing. I think the position would have been a lot worse had we not been taking mitigating steps over the last few years. Mark,
Thank you, Chair. No, I think we're recognising that it's a national issue, and that hopefully that implies there's a national response and that there's groups working on it together. And are we part of that?
I'll just give you a political answer, which is, you know, this is real money. To repay it, you've got to get rid of the deficit. So cash has to go from central government to local government, and that's not a very popular thing to be doing. So the probability is it'll just be kicked down the road just for a couple more years until there's another election. It's terrible. Rachel, I don't know whether you can say something non-political.
I can, yes, and I have to. It's something that our external auditors are monitoring as part of their value for money work as well. So in terms of the risk to the council's financial sustainability, this is a measure that Grant Thornton will look at. It was included in our annual audit report last year, where it was noted that this was not a significant issue for Herefordshire, but I imagine that's something that our external auditors will be looking at closely for this year and future years in terms of that impact to the council's financial sustainability in the context of the national picture.
Andrew, are you poised to?
Well, Chair, I was just going to add that we are speaking to other 151 officers and other councils that we're all having to deal with this quite challenging arrangement. So it's something we are sharing knowledge and experience, and certainly colleagues in children's services, again, are sharing that experience across councils. But the reality is we're having to deal with a demand exceeding the supply of cash, and that's the fundamental challenge we're having to deal with.
Holly.
I assume that this is really a demand-led budget. Yes, and the demand is going to increase, not decrease, for both adult and children's services.
Yeah, Peter. Yeah.
So what I can say is that unlike, as Councillor Andrews was saying, it's demand-led, unlike children's services and adult services, which are demand-led but we control, this one is actually even more challenging because we don't have any control on it whatsoever. It's the local authorities, local education authorities. So again, even more complex. But as Andrew was saying, we're working with other councils to pick up best practice and do everything that we can do.
Okay. Just the final thing on this element of this agenda item, at the very end you'll see it says the key governance challenges facing the council in 24-25. will be monitored by the corporate leadership team and the Audit and Governance Committee. So I look forward to working closely with everybody on that. And I will now make the recommendation. So I think we note the draft governance statement. Various comments have been made which will be taken into account. If anybody on a further reading of the document wants to make any further comments, then please pass them back to Rachel, and they will be considered for the final draft. All those in favour of that, show of hands. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the draft statement of accounts. Pete's already mentioned the great result of getting these up so incredibly quickly. Well done to the team. Rachel, would you like to introduce this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to present the draft statement of accounts for 23-24. As Councillor Stoddart and the Chair have already mentioned, we met the statutory deadline of the 31st of May to prepare and publish these accounts, and we're amongst a small group of unitary authorities and in fact councils across the land that have met that deadline this year. The accounts present the position and performance of the council for the year ended 31st of March 2024, and they include the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, a balance sheet, movement in reserves statement, cash flow statement, collection fund statement, the group accounts and supporting notes. The accounts have been prepared by reference to international financial reporting standards and are compliant with the SIPFA Code of Practice, and they're presented in a prescribed statutory format. The outturn position for the year for the Council, as reported to Cabinet on the 16th of May, was an overspend of 8.7 million, and this is detailed on page 8 of the accounts in the narrative report. For the purposes of the presentation of the statutory accounting document, we're required to make some financial accounting adjustments, including capital and reserve movements, and this shows therefore an adjusted deficit of 7 million in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, and note 8 to the accounts details these adjustments. The Council's balance sheet includes our land and building and investment assets. We've revalued 81% of our land and building assets in the year through our external valuers, in line with our rolling programme, and 100% of investment assets have been valued in the year as we are required to do by international standards. The accounts will now be subject to external audit, and they'll carry out their testing as per the plan that they presented to this committee at the last meeting. We're very grateful that the external auditors have identified additional resource, and the audit has now started 3 weeks early, and I'm really happy that the team have been able to respond. We've got some good working papers prepared, high quality working papers. That means we've been able to meet that early requirement. We're really hopeful then that means we'll be able to support a timely audit, and we'll be able to bring an audit opinion to this committee in September in line with the statutory audit deadline. I'm happy to take any questions.
Right. Are we going to go through it page by page, or Frank, do you have a sort of general overview question?
I'll jump in one of the last comments.
Go ahead, Frank. Yeah.
Well, we'll go through it page by page, Grant. But just while you said it, Rachel, you've carried out new valuations for properties. Do the auditors accept the new valuations, or do they go and revalue them?
Through you, Chair. So we engage a firm of RICS, registered external valuers, to carry out those valuations. They provide a series of detailed working papers to evidence their valuations and the assumptions that they have made in reaching those values. As a council finance team, then we are required to challenge those values, and our external auditors will then review not only the valuations produced by the external valuers, but they will also review how we have challenged the movement in those valuations in the year.
Peter.
Just a minor point really on presentation, or a way of expressing the pie charts that that are really informative, various different ones, but would it perhaps be helpful to put maybe beneath them or alongside them the value of 100% in each case of the contents of that chart?
Through you, Chair. Absolutely, we've taken that away already as an improvement recommendation, and we'll provide an explanation of the correlation between the two pie charts.
Yeah, okay. Mark?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. A pie chart again, because I like those. They just draw the eye, don't they, in these reports? Page 58 of the pack, or page 6 of the report, there's the political structure 2023-24. I'm just wondering, what is the relevance of having the political structure presented and described in a finance report? Is that a mandatory part of it, or is it just part of the? Because the public see this, obviously. What's it intended to do? Thank you.
Thank you. So the purpose of the narrative report is to provide some background for the user of the accounts on the council and its operations throughout the year, and that includes its leadership and political structure. So it's considered best practice to include that information in that narrative report for information.
Okay, so we're talking about big numbers here, a long report over 100 pages, millions and millions of pounds, looked at by lay people, to be frank. As the Section 151 officer said, this is a document by accountants for accountants. But I think we have to apply a sort of common sense approach, and our role is to ask questions which perhaps the common man might ask, to get a general understanding, and if provided we get comfort from the responses, then I think that's what we do. We rely upon the auditors who are going to look at every single figure here. We rely upon them getting that right in the same way as we rely upon our officers. So with that sort of background, we don't want to go into too much detail, but I think if we go through the document, and if I just say anything on the first 10 pages, any questions? Move on then to the next 10, which is, yeah. Well, I suppose we'll go up to the page 67 to start with, which is the narrative report. Anything up to that page. I was pleased to see the on the page 66, the first bullet point talks about safeguarding the financial position of the council. High-risk budget areas have been identified and financial support is targeted in these areas. I was pleased to see that. I don't know whether anybody, I don't think you can actually tell everybody who all the high-risk areas are, but perhaps one or two examples might be useful, Rachel.
Through you, Chair, the high-risk areas are those which are subject to volatility throughout the year. By reference to last year's outturn report, we look at those areas where there were significant budget variances, and that informs our allocation of resources and our reporting of risk through the monthly financial monitoring. So, for example, that would be children's services, some of those demand-led areas where there are pressures.
Yeah, I suppose what came through my mind was inflation. You know, when the report was being prepared November, December last year, probably inflation was much higher than it now is. So is that a possible upside? So a positive risk, if you like. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we will monitor those by reference to that approved budget that Council approved in February through our internal monitoring, and report that quarterly to Cabinet.
Yeah, I suppose the knock-on effect as well as with interest rates probably going down on the deposits we have in place. It's going to have an opposite effect, maybe. Anybody, any other questions going on then? Page 70. This is the summary page, and I look at this and it gives me the wobbles, because on the left-hand side where it says surplus deficit for last year, the deficit was 32 million, and the new administration have obviously done a fantastic job because the deficit is now down to 7. It's not as straightforward as that, and I hope nobody would quote me for saying that. When we had the figure of 32.6 last year, it was against a deficit of 5. And it's just so complicated, isn't it, Rachel, how these things, and I ask the same question every year, please explain how you get to these figures, and you have provided me with a breakdown.
Yeah, and happy to provide some detailed written explanation for members. As I said in my introduction, the outturn report to Cabinet in May reported the 8.7 million overspend for the year. We've made some accounting adjustments as we're required to for capital and reserve movements, and that therefore reaches the 7 million figure that's reported here. There's a note in the accounts to explain the movement between that 8.7 and the 7 million as reported here. External audit will test all of those adjustments, but I'm happy to provide a written, more detailed response if required.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. Peter, do you?
So, Chair, without being political, it's a case very much I was able to get the agreement with my cabinet colleagues that they have responsibility to work with the council officers to deliver their portfolios. So back in, I think it was November, we put in place moratorium. So anything above £500 we put in place, that had to be signed off by a director. So again, that had a good effect. So when we went from Q2 to Q4, so we went from, was it 13.8, I think, wasn't it? 13.8 in Q2 down to 8.7. That was done through measures like that and actually forcing our cabinet officers, our cabinet colleagues to work with their directors to be aware of the budgets and drag them down.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Robert?
Yeah, I asked earlier what was an unusable reserve, because one of the few things I noted from this report is you've got a 464.9 million set of unusable reserves. They can't be the same sort of thing as our £6 million problem with the schools fund. What are they?
Shall we? We'll come to that note as we go through the pages, if that's all right, Robert.
It's on the same page as we were looking at, isn't it? 71. It's the bottom right of page 71.
Okay. But I was thinking we'd wait till we got to the notes, which have lots of detail on that. Okay. But going to page 71, interesting, investment property has gone up from 41.9 million to 52.6. That's a 20% increase, which is great news for the council, but I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever because it's all sat in, the increase in that is sat in the reserves, which are unusable, that element, yeah. But it's interesting that, you know, the value of our investments has gone up. So many councils have a problem with their investments going down, being revalued. Ours have gone the other way, partly as a result of good management of the rent increases and all that kind of bringing the leases up to date. So that was page 71. Anything on? Yep. Okay, Robert, 71. Now go on then. You want to ask about the unusable reserves?
Yeah, well, because I asked about what they were earlier, and £6 million has gone into unusable reserves, £6 million negative. So I sort of worry, being an idiot, what does £464 million worth of unusable reserves mean?
Well, we go to page 115. It's note 30. Might be of some help. Rachel, did you want to comment on?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So those unusable reserves are detailed in note 30, which is on page 115 of the accounts. You'll see the list there, which includes short-term absences accounts, capital adjustment account, collection fund, financial instruments, pensions, revaluation reserve, and that DSG adjustment account. So these are reserves that hold the technical financial accounting adjustments through the year. So, for example, the revaluation reserve, as our land and building assets or investment property increases in value, the I'm going to try not to sound like an accountant now and talk about double entry, but the other side of the accounting entry to reflect that increase is carried in this unusable reserve.
I guess it's what it says on the tin. It's not usable, so you can't. You, it's a £6 million. No, it's there. It's there, but we can't use it. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. We'll go back to page 70. I think it was 71. Thank you. You got something on that, Frank?
I am trying to dart between what it says on 71 and the notes that come at But simply put, what is the difference between property, which is on the top line, and investment property? How do we, simply put?
So there's an accounting standard that governs the classification of our assets. Property, plant and equipment represents our operational assets. Investment property has quite a narrow definition, and that's where we hold property for rental income purposes only.
Aubrey.
In valuing property, can you tell me, as a trustee of Saxon Hall Community Centre, I was wondering how this was valued. If we look at the history, it came because of the sale of the old SAS site. We were granted the corner containing the old SAS community centre plus the chapel, and that was after request by ourselves as a community association. So this was transferred by Taylor Wimpey to council to be run as community centre. Sorry. We then had funding from Southwide Development Fund to turn the chapel immediately into a community centre, and we had further funding from Taylor Wimpey to add an extension on. So the property is in the name of the council. All the money spent on it has come from outside. They haven't purchased it. We pay a peppercorn rent. Is this valued, or how is it valued on the council's balance sheet in property?
Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So it's included under our community assets within our property, plant and equipment asset category on the balance sheet, but I'm happy to provide some more details as the history of the valuation and any movements for you.
Yeah, but it's valued at...
It'll probably be in accordance with the RICS rules. Yeah.
It's given the value, or is it...
It absolutely is. Its current carrying value is £881,000.
Right. That's the whole of the site, obviously, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. Any more? We're on page 71. So anybody want to come in with anything else? I've got a question on page 92. Move on to that. The next bit is page 92. Yeah, so this is the NHS and joint funding. It looks to me as if there might be a deficit. So in the column, it's the third from the right, 1.5 million, which is not in brackets, but it's still a negative. And I'm wondering how that's funded. You might want to come back to me with that one. On that one, yes. Have a look at that.
Yeah, we might have to come back to you with some detail on that.
Okay, fine. And then we've got page 116. We all there? Page 116. So these are the movements in earmark reserves, which Robert I think is more interesting. So these are the usable reserves, but these actually ones are earmarked for particular purposes. So you've got to use them within particular envelope. And this shows that they have reduced. So what we're looking at is to explain where the 8.3 million deficit, where does that appear? If you look at the company accounts, you've made a loss, you look at the P&L and you'd see the P&L reserve go down by 8.3. Well, the main general reserves have remained the same, and the rest of that, the deficit, has actually come out of other earmarked reserves. Rachel, is that a fair explanation of where the money has gone from?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So as part of our outturn reporting, we carried out a review of those earmarked reserve balances to identify where we could fund the £8.7 million overspend from. I know that question was asked at the recent Cabinet meeting. We're about to publish a response to that question through the usual process. Some of those reserves are held to represent grants that have been awarded and not fully spent, but the outcomes have been met. So we carried out a review of those balances as part of good financial housekeeping, as well as looking at some of those other larger areas to identify where we could release some elements of those reserves whilst maintaining an appropriate balance to manage future risk. So we can provide a detailed breakdown of where that £8.7 million was funded from, and in fact that will be published shortly.
Yeah. Any questions on that? I was going to say, Pete, so it's comforting that the general reserve figure has remained as it was. It does give us some protection in the event that we don't perform as well as we hope to this current year. So there is a route, as an escape route, which many councils do not have. So for the purpose of this committee, it's good to see that the general reserves position has been maintained at the same level. It's very good news, I think, for everybody. Residents, councillors, everybody.
So the general reserves, as you say, Chair, are maintained. It's our plan that they will be increasing this year to an even better position. One of the points, as Rachel was just referring to, we went through the earmarked reserves to identify where we could get the £7.8 million from. One of the decisions that had been taken at full council back in in February, the amendment by Councillor Harvey, when she put together, she by limiting the 1.9 financial reserves, wasn't it? There's two reserves that she'd earmarked to be used to cover a contingency for children's services. That actually had the impact of making our job slightly more challenging, because we could not use that to actually use against the areas that we were trying to find the deficit from. But we did find it, as Richard alluded to, that will come out very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. So any other questions on the accounts? Frank?
I think we as a committee, and it's both officers and councillors, know that everything is really quite straightforward about this. We're asking the questions and we can see. But our local newspaper is very good at picking out headlines, and so is one of the local social media things. It calls itself no, I won't name it. But they pick out these headlines and criticise us all, be we councillors or be we officers. How do we counter those sort of negative headlines, but in a right way? Because we know that everything we're doing is well and above board.
Thank you. That's a really good question. This is a highly complex document, and I think we'll coin the phrase a document by accountants for accountants, trademarked Andrew Lovegrove. We've produced a simplified set of statements this year. We're not required to do this, but it's something that we think offers a more user-friendly document, and that's published on our website in the same area as this statutory document. So in terms of alerting users and residents to that snapshot of the council's position and performance, it's a 2-page document. It's really easy to read, and I encourage anybody to go and seek that out. Hopefully it's reach within 3 clicks, but I will check that afterwards. In terms of assurance for members of the public and through the press, a key source of information and evidence is the external auditor's report. That's an externally appointed independent review, that fresh pair of eyes. They're appointed through the Public Sector Appointments Committee, and their report, which will come to this committee in September, summarises the work that they've done and the assurance that residents and users can place on their work in terms of our the accuracy of what we've reported here in terms of our finances. But separate to that, the value for money work that external audit carry out measures the council's position in terms of our financial sustainability, our governance arrangements, and our 3 E's, the economy, efficiency and effectiveness in our use of resources. So again, that's a really valuable report for readers and residents to look at to gain that assurance about our position.
Yeah, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Thornbury, as the Cabinet Member for Finance, I have to say I have frustrations at times when we present to Cabinet and to full Council very clear, and I'm not an accountant, I'm an engineer, so I try to produce my financial statements in English, in plain English, as I try to do. And I like to always finish each of them by emphasising the strong position that we're in. But it is frustrating when that is ignored by the media and all we seem to have is minutiae of detail rather than the overall picture. And I'd like to this opportunity again to remind everybody, as a council, we're in a very, very enviable position by many other councils. We have strong accounts. We've got an MTFS that is balanced. We have a balanced budget for this year, and we have strong governance in place. So again, we are in a very good position.
Peter, I think it just interject there. I think the communication is always is an issue within the council. I don't know whose portfolio it is from a political perspective. Ben Proctor, who's now the Scrutiny Committee Chair, now he used to be involved with comms within the council. So it might perhaps be appropriate to ask them to have a look at it. It's not something for this committee to look at, but it might be something, Frank, you might want to raise with Councillor Proctor. I don't know, are you on the Scrutiny Managing Committee now? Yeah, good. Peter.
Yeah, interested to hear that there is a draft of a 2-page document available. Is there any reason why it didn't come forward today?
It is with the papers. Yes, yeah. It's just a single page. Well, two sides of a page. So at the end.
It's page 171 and 172. But again, I think as part of member training, it's something that we're happy to offer some additional guidance. They are quite difficult documents to navigate, so we're happy to provide some additional training if required.
Yes, and it's obviously not obvious. Yeah. Polly, yeah.
I think we have to accept that the press, particularly the local press, always put things down to its simplest level, and if they can produce a bit of bad news, that's always more. They're always more pleased to do that than good news, and I think that's something we all have to live with, and some of us have lived with it for many years.
Yes, well, the leader and when I was the leader, we had quarterly meetings with the editor to try to improve communications. We obviously didn't do a particularly good job. Mark.
I think that this is, you're not hiding to nothing with this one. We just have to accept that the press will, if it's bad news, they're far more likely to publish it than good news, and we just have to live with it.
Mark, I think you, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, Chair. Back to that page about earmark reserves, just for clarification, is that actually money in the bank? Yes. So as money in the bank, that's a lot of money. Interest rate, where does the interest go? And how does that get rolled back in? Does it have to go back into the same reserve pot, or can you do whatever you like with the interest from the bank?
So our treasury management strategy governs the way that we account for our interest on our balances in total, and the current treasury management strategy is that we all of our cash balances are together, and we report our interest receivable through the management accounts, and those are reflected in these accounts. So it doesn't go back to a specific earmarked reserve under the current strategy.
Sorry, could you just say where would that be reported then in your financial report?
So in terms of our quarterly monitoring reports, it's included in the central line, and we make explicit reference to those receipts. And in the statutory accounts, it's included, I think it's note 9 in our financing and investment income and expenditure.
Thank you.
Peter, I want to move on, if you don't mind. Yeah.
This picks obviously on your point where with inflation going down, or while inflation was high, we did benefit by increased interest rates. And I think when you look at it, it was quite a substantial increase in the interest rate we received the last financial year.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I may, with no more comments, the recommendation is that we note these draft accounts. I think we should acknowledge the effort put in by the accounting team to complete these accounts on time, and various comments have been made. They will be minuted and taken into account. So if I can just have acceptance of that recommendation, all in favour? Thank you very much. We move then internal audit update. Report quarter 1. Amy, I think you're reporting on this, is that right? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the quarter 1 update for the 24-25 financial year as of the 17th of May this year. Since our last update to committee, there have been no high organisational risks to bring to your attention. There have been 3 limited assurance audits and 14 priority 2 findings identified. The 1-page summary reports for those 3 limited assurance audits are attached in full within the report. These are on pages 183 to 185. I'm happy to provide further details and answer any questions you have in relation to those at the end. And we've got Roger Allenby here who can help answer questions. And I believe Andrew and Rachel are happy to pick up questions around the procurement card audit. Before we answer any sort of direct questions, I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to some of the thematic findings that stand out across those 3 audits. They're around sort of governance and project management, but I just want to be clear that I'm not talking about sort of the PMO there, the council's corporate PMO, and audit trails and retention of key documentation. Since our last update to committee, we've completed 11 audits, and those are fed into the annual opinion for last year, 23-24, and Rupert's going to shortly present the annual opinion report after the progress report. For this year, 24-25, we've currently got 8 audits in progress, and one of those is at draft report stage. And then based on this in progress work we have completed to date, we've provided an indicative rolling opinion of a reasonable assurance. And then if I bring your attention to page 179 of the pack, this shows the coverage against the council's corporate risks. Coverage at the moment is quite limited, and this is a result of the influx of the new risks that were added to the risk register in March earlier this year. As part of a rolling plan, we'd hope to see coverage increase over the next year. And during planning meetings that are currently taking place, we are discussing these new risks. And then lastly, not sure if anyone would have noticed, there's no reference to the feedback from our customer satisfaction surveys in the progress report, but just wanted to draw your attention that Rupert will report on that in the annual opinion. Happy to take any questions.
So any questions before we get on to the specific reports at the end? Yeah, Peter.
I recall that we talked to one of your colleagues when the subject of project management came up before, and it was said then, if I recall, that the internal auditors could help us not just with an end of season, but ongoing, whether there was risks involved in the projects that were being managed by us. Is that incorporated in this somehow?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, in terms of planning meetings, I've had a meeting with Lisa Evans, who is the responsible officer for the project management, the PMO, and she was really keen to see us do some audit work in the early stages of projects rather than the end. And she was also keen to have some assurance around the PMO processes themselves. They'll be built into the rolling plan going forward now for this year.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so no questions on the main body of the report. But then going on to the three specific reports. I don't know whether anybody wants to start the questions on these. Okay, so the scope, Amy here was audit scope on page 183. It says the audit aimed to sample contracts from the HES sales receipts records for 23-14 to 23-24. So that was a minimum of one each financial year. Due to delays in obtaining documentation, 7 samples were tested. Now I read that and I have some concerns, and I'm just interested to know what you as the internal auditors are going to continue to do, or are you satisfied with the information which you've got and you're not going to take it any further?
Thank you for your question, Chair. I think it was a decision that was made between ourselves and Andrew that we would progress with the audit with what was provided to date rather than delay any audit findings being completed. And I believe we've been asked to revisit to do a little bit more testing so that we can provide more assurance around the sales.
Okay, so there might be a supplemental report. Hopefully there will be a supplemental report. And will that therefore look for at least 3 more site sales? Is that how it's going to work? Or?
Currently we've not discussed that, but I'm sure I think 3 would be easily done, perhaps more.
It's a matter of what documentation is available. Presumably now you've got some documentation, you know how to get more for other sales.
Yeah, I don't think obtaining the documentation this time round will be an issue.
So that's helpful, thank you. I think the board is now disbanded at the HES, hasn't it? Is that right, Roger?
It hasn't disbanded yet, no. So we're going through a process of looking at how we might reconcile the scale of the board down, because most of the work of the HES has now been completed. So the role of it, and this is kind of partly what's been worked through in the audit in terms of roles and responsibilities. So the HES board is a limited company, but the services and functions that are provided by or in support of the enterprise zone are primarily through the council. So the HES board's role is to consider how we market the land on the enterprise zone to attract businesses to come and locate and develop there. And then in support of that, there's something called a placement strategy that says what are the kinds of businesses that we want to attract in order to generate higher value jobs, higher value employment opportunities for local people. And the board considers whether the business that seeks to want to buy that plot of land would meet that placement strategy. Thereafter, the activity is completed by the council, so the actual land sale element is within the council because it's council-owned land. So the majority of plots on the enterprise zone have now come forward for or going through the process of sale, not all of them, but most of them. So the majority of that work in terms of marketing and placement is completed, so the board is likely to reduce in size and scope, but it's still in existence as it currently stands.
Okay. So I read this report, and I also read the one about the HBID, and the impression I had overall was that internal audit are basically saying that it's a little bit out of control, that the council needs to grab hold of these things rather than let them run on. If you're on the other side of the the picture. So you're a private sector director of a company. You'll look at the enterprise zone and say, well, one of the reasons for success was the council was not heavily involved in it, and the bid will resist council being more and more involved. And in both cases, there's a suggestion that the council should put their hands much more on these things, whereas the feeling before was, we wanted to keep hands off because it enabled business to get on and not be held back by the shackles of the council. Roger, is that so? I suppose that there are learnings from this. So I'm interested just on your comment about that conflict, which so we then have the Ross Enterprise Zone, and we need to be learning what is appropriate. So how can we make sure Ross Enterprise Zone goes ahead speedily without all the constraints that the private enterprise might be seeing are introduced by all these governance-y kind of things, which they don't like. So part of the exercise is what do we learn for Ross? How do we make sure that can happen quickly, but complying with what the internal audits say it should be? And it's a juggling act, I think.
And so I think obviously the two kind of slightly separate audits and kind of findings. So I think in the context of the Hereford Enterprise Zone and the learnings for Ross, I think that the general approach and model that we've used for the Enterprise Zone has worked well in terms of attracting business investment and being able to look at things like how planning and other things have been supportive and local development orders supported kind of quicker turnaround of sites and give confidence to the private sector that we as a council can respond to their timeframes in terms of attracting that kind of level of investment. And that's obviously what we would then hope to replicate on the Ross Enterprise Park development. And we're looking at the learnings between what we've done on the Hereford Enterprise Zone and here. I think if you read the more detailed elements of the audit behind the one page, the things that came out in terms of really the HES board were predominantly around the detailing of the proposals that have gone to the board in terms of the placement strategy. So the board, I think, have felt comfortable with the information that they've had around that debate, but it's about how that's been more fully documented to demonstrate that balance between the private discussion, private sector to kind of led discussion, and the audit trail that comes behind it is fulfilled, and that we've got a good documented record of why and what some of those decisions are. And then in terms of the terms of reference around the board, just making it clear for everybody that, and from an external perspective, about whose role it is to do what stage, because as I say, for the HES, for the Hereford Enterprise Zone, it's been the board's role to promote the sales and look at the strategic context of the sales, but it's the council's role then to fulfil the sales, demonstrate value for money for the plots, and to complete the contractual elements. So we can take the learnings of having those clear terms of reference and that detailed kind of learning in terms of what we present and how we document some of those decisions onto the Ross Enterprise Park. I think the Destination Business Improvement District is slightly different. So I think the role of the audit that Amy very ably undertook was to kind of say within the council, what's the learnings that we could take going forward, not necessarily what the private sector would learn. So any business improvement district touches on many elements of the council. So there's the bit around, in this case, for the county destination business improvement district, it delivers economic development outcomes, it promotes tourism, and it does things that support the kind of functions that I'm responsible for. But once that ballot is undertaken, the levy is collected by finance colleagues, and the ballot element is led by governance colleagues. So the process of undertaking and managing a bid within the council touches lots of different parts of the council. And I think the learning is that we could have been a bit more kind of coordinated internally. That's not to impinge upon the private sector's role in terms of wanting to create a bid or how they might take forward a bid and instigate a business improvement district if they want, but it's more about the point in which they would then approach the council for our role and how we can better learn and coordinate and learn the lessons that we have from previous bids within the work that we do inside of the council. So it shouldn't impair that kind of private impetus or slow down the engagement that we would have with the private sector, in fact improve the way in which we work with them going forward. I don't know if that's fair, Amy, in terms of the finding.
I think that was a very good explanation, actually, Roger. I don't think I could have done that.
Any other further questions from anybody? Frank.
I'm just picking up, because SWAT present an excellent report, as we've come to expect that they would. Nationally, there are two big concerns, and I'm just would hate to think that Herefordshire Council ever came under that spotlight because they've missed something that's happening. So we look at the post office and we look at the NHS. If SWAP were involved in either of those two organisations, would they have picked up on what was happening, and would they have been able to advise the people at the top, this is happening and something needs to happen about it? Because I'd love to think that Herefordshire Council can never get into a place where something's been happening that we're not being made aware of, and then you have a national scandal, which should never have happened. Would SWAP identify something very early days?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think I'd probably start with, we don't know what we don't know, but what we do is hold lots of meetings with key individuals across the council. We're looking at risk registers. We've constantly been fed lots of information to, I suppose, drive our scope where we need to audit. So I confidently would like to say yes, I think we would find things, and likewise our relationships within the council mean that we would escalate things. So if we were doing a very simple audit in building control and there was a sort of a red flag, we wouldn't sort of just, we'd highlight that with Rachel, Andrew, the chair of the committee, and escalate those things appropriately. I don't know if Rupert wants to add anything there.
No, I think a really impossible question to answer, but a really good question. Again, I always like to phrase it, we can audit anything, but we can't audit everything. So we can never come to you and say, we'll give you full assurance that every governance, risk and control process in the council is working effectively. We'd be foolish to do that. So we can audit anything. So again, we rely on common sort of channels like Amy suggested. We meet senior managers. There's obviously whistleblowing arrangements in place. There's a strong counter-fraud team, which will all receive intel and be able to feed that through to us. Similarly, like Amy's alluded to, management are very good at coming to us with sort of open concerns. But no, we can't provide absolute assurance that we would pick up on that. But we'll obviously do all we can. And similar to the annual governance statement, there's obviously internal processes that would hopefully sort of raise those red flags.
Thank you, Rupert. Aubrey?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And we already had a sort of post office situation in children's services. And that was going on for some time before before it was pulled together.
Yeah, it's probably not a question for anybody else around the table, Aubrey. We'd all have our own views on that, or certainly I would. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. So Rupert, we're going to be getting access to your audit board, and I think after this meeting we're having some training, aren't we? And what we're looking at here, this report, you've derived the numbers from there or the displays from there, is that right? And what we've just been saying is, we don't know what we don't know, and so on. And there are a lot of audits there that are yet to start, have not started. So I've got two questions. One is, are you comfortable where we are at this time of year? Is SWAP comfortable that you are tackling the right number at this time, or do you feel that you're going to be a bit swamped because there are so many things to audit? That's the first thing. And secondly, when it comes to an audit that you haven't started, or that you say in progress, yeah? So what constitutes it being taken from waiting to be in progress? What is the trigger? Is it someone in the council says, right, we're ready? Or is it someone in SWAP saying, we're ready? So who decides how to initiate that? We don't want everyone waiting on the next person in order to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Picking up on the second one first, it's a kind of collaborative process that waiting to go live effectively means we are developing what we call an audit brief, which is effectively the terms of reference for the audit. So what are we going to cover? Who's going to be involved? Who are the key stakeholders? So we'll have that conversation in sort of waiting to go live. Once that's been agreed in terms of what the internal audit will cover, who's going to be involved, then we'll sort of move that audit to in progress. So again, that will be a kind of collaborative decision that will ensure that officers have the right capacity to facilitate our work. Equally, we'll ensure that we've got resources lined up our side to actually start the work. So it's not a sort of set date necessarily. It's a collaborative discussion, which means we kind of get to a point where we're both happy to start. And we're both agreed on the sort of the proposed scope. And just in terms of your first question, again, a really good point that what we try and focus on is kind of coverage, and we split that a number of ways. So again, we try and cover as many strategic risks that the council faces as possible, or at least the sort of strategic risks that are documented. And again, as I'm glad we've already talked about risk management, we're really keen to see risk management sort of refreshed, reinvigorated, so that sort of strategic risk is an accurate reflection of the kind of top risks that Herefordshire faces, and obviously, like you say, the registers that sit under that. So primarily we want to kind of focus our work on coverage of those key strategic risks, but we also look at kind of coverage of corporate priorities, coverage of kind of directorates, so that we've got a kind of fair split amongst directorates, as well as any other sort of intel that we receive. So in terms of, you know, counter fraud or whistleblowing or key projects or concerns from members or other kind of key stakeholders. So yeah, it's a difficult balance. There's no sort of right level of audit or kind of defined level of audit that you have to do X number of reviews per year. And that's why we're really keen to show the coverage, so that you as members can go, hang on a minute, we haven't got any coverage around cybersecurity, or we haven't got any coverage around children's services. That feels wrong, that feels risky. Can we have a conversation around that and direct internal audit resource, you know, to that area if possible?
Peter? No, Robert.
Yes, thank you. I can't do ventriloquism, sorry. Do you do any case studies of failings of internal audit in other areas? For example, who was doing the internal audit for Woking? For example, do you actually do case studies to see whether you can revise your own procedures about what went wrong in some of those places?
That's an interesting question. No, we don't. We're not quite that sadistic, but we probably should maybe in terms of lessons learnt. But no, I know SITFA obviously do some good sort of reviews, not internal audit focused, but I think they obviously pick up on a whole range of governance issues in terms of those councils that have gone into sort of commissioner-led situations, and I believe Grant Thornton also do a helpful sort of summary of lessons learnt. But no, we don't specifically look at the internal audit arrangements and learn from that. But I think it's a good suggestion and one that I will take away. So thank you.
I think it would be a good suggestion that you do look at some of the obvious major failings. I mean, for example, Birmingham, we know quite well what went wrong there, but how Woking managed to have a 17 million annual budget and get 1.7 billion in debt is a bit hard to understand. And perhaps that's the sort of horror that we want to clearly avoid.
Absolutely, right. Just going back, if I may, to the enterprise zone report, I think, Roger, you kind of intimated that there's better information in the actual report itself, so I would like to see that report, and also the HBID one. I don't know whether anybody else wants to use this as an exercise to dig a bit deeper into one of these reports and see what they say. Anybody wish to? No? Well, I will certainly have a look at that. And I'm also interested in the first of these key conclusions, where it says assurances that market value is achieved cannot be provided for one of the 7 plot sales. Will the explanation for that be in the report?
Chair, I think it is in the report, but I could probably give you a brief explanation if you want it now.
Yes, if you would, please. Thank you.
This was to do with the evaluations that the council had done on the plots. So we've got the copy of evaluation at a point in time, and then I think there were some adjustments to which bit of land was actually going to be sold. Therefore, a new valuation was done, and it's that valuation that we weren't able to locate in property services filing structure. So it's, yes, the valuation we've got isn't what the plot was sold for, and we don't have the audit trail to account for that difference.
Okay, so have you tried to find out from the valuer the new valuation, or?
I haven't personally. I think that would probably be for the council to do.
Yeah.
I think that I might just be worth kind of explaining a little bit around this. So this obviously looked at a 10-year period. So there's been lots of changes in the way in which the council kind of processes and systems work over that period of time. So for the kind of last 4 or 5 years I've been around, what's tended to happen is when a plot comes forward for sale, an independent valuation is undertaken along with a range of plot information for that sale, and that is reviewed by Andrew as the 151 officer, and then by the delegated corporate director, in this case Ross Cook, for sign off of that decision. So there's a suite of papers that go with each of those current decisions. When you go back over the 10-year period, there was different approaches taken. So at some points we had internal valuers in the property team that then did that judgment and assessment themselves. And then actually some of the land sales that, whilst they're in the term of the enterprise zone, had been agreed and were going through the process of sale at the point in which the enterprise zone itself was created 10 years ago. And obviously taking 10 years is quite a long time. So when you take that kind of 10-year look back at some of the samples, and that's where some of the complexity has been in terms of finding some of the paperwork, in terms of systems, processes, ways of working, governance structures have all evolved over that period of time, all improved over that time, really, from lessons learned from how that's been undertaken. So that's where some of that complexity around the individual plot information was more difficult to locate in some of the earlier land sales.
And anybody who knows, I was a director of the company for 4 years while I was leader, so I have a particular interest to make sure things were being done properly while I was a director. So I'd like to be involved or try to find out what happened then. And the de-bid thing, Roger, I think the concern at the time was about kind of a bit of silo thinking and departments in the council not really working quite as effectively together as they would. How confident are you that things have improved?
So we've taken the learning from the report that, as I said, Amy very ably led, and I guess was picking up on some of the earlier comments. It's as an officer working in the services, it's very helpful to work with SWAT, because they not only they give very constructive challenge into reviewing what they do, but then give identify good areas of thinking that we haven't really thought about, by taking a fresh pair of eyes and providing some very helpful advice as to how we can improve ourselves. So it's not a standoff between a kind of an audit and a service. It's how we constructively work together to improve, and SWAP do that very well. I think in terms of the DBID, the current city business improvement district is due to go out to ballot in the autumn, hopefully not giving too much away. They're towards the end of their 5 years period, and we're learning the lessons around kind of having a coordinated approach across the different teams now to implementing some of those findings. The thing which caused obviously the biggest challenge around the county business improvement district was the interpretation around who should be rateable value around about £100,000, and how that could have been more prescriptively written into the business plan, which is the subject of the ballot. And certainly we'll be taking that learning into the one this autumn when we work with the city bid, just to make sure that we've learnt those lessons.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll kind of happen seamlessly without big delays. I know you obviously have reduced numbers in your department, as it were. So it's a little bit more. In a way, it's harder for you because you've got fewer resources to be covering off these particular problems.
And obviously, a business improvement district is a really great way of the private sector and the public sector to come together to raise more funds to deliver more impact, and therefore it's a really good thing for us to be able to work on in that sense. And I think that the difference we have going forward is it's unlikely that we would get a completely new business improvement district somewhere, because there's a Hereford City one that's come to an end of its 10-year period and about to go into its kind of 15th year if it's voted in the autumn. So there's already structures around levy collection and delivery and governance. And then the kind of wider county bid would ballot in another couple of years. And again, the structures and the organisation and the company and the local people involved in it's now there. I think where the learning from this one in particular was that it was a new group coming together, a consultant we'd procured to kind of help develop the plan that wasn't going to own the delivery thereafter. So it's some of the established structures help us work with existing partners rather than completely new ones.
Thank you, Roger. Any more? Shall we move on the final report, which is about procurement card proactive fraud review? Anybody got any questions about that. I suppose the scale is what is quite difficult to understand looking at these papers, because, you know, 11 transactions across 2 procurement cards required further review. Well, is that a lot, or is that very few? I mean, I imagine the transactions must be in the 10,000s or something like that. Amy.
Sorry, Chair, that's definitely something that's come back, feedback in the past around giving context. So I'll provide that figure for you outside of committee and take that on board in our reports going forward, that we give you that context.
Yeah, yeah. Mark, I think that was your point to me earlier. Do you have any other thoughts, questions? Anybody? I mean, it's comforting to me. I didn't think it was a huge issue. And the saving to the council from not having to punch all the numbers in all the time is huge using a card system like this, and we have to trust people a little bit to get everything, do everything properly, and I'm sure most people do use it exactly the way it should be used. Okay, shall I move then to the recommendation? We reviewed the areas of activity and concern, satisfied the necessary improvements are outlined and delivered, and we note the report and consider the assurances provided, and we've made various comments on them. So all those happy with that recommendation? Thank you. So item 12, Rupert, this is yours, and you're the last on the agenda, really. So take that whichever way you wish.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, our second swap paper today is our internal audit annual opinion report. So this provides a retrospective sort of annual opportunity for the head of audit to provide the overall opinion on governance, risk management and the internal control environment at Herefordshire Council. So I'm going to start on page 192 of your agenda pack. So this is our sort of at a glance page, so some of the hopefully the key messages of the report. Like I've included on page 192, the opinion is obviously based on the balance of all our individual internal audit reviews that we carry out throughout the year. However, we do obviously consider other sort of sources of assurance. We liaise closely with obviously finance colleagues, counter-fraud colleagues, other colleagues to build up a kind of wider picture of assurance. We obviously consider any notable or key changes to the organisation throughout the period. And we also look at our audit follow-up work in terms of sort of closing the loop on some of those kind of agreed actions that management have agreed to take forward. So the key message obviously is the opinion is reasonable overall, which is a broadly positive picture. Also no sort of key qualifications to that opinion to bring to the committee's attention. There were no organisational risks that we sort of categorised as high in our work throughout the year. So again, that's a positive picture, that we didn't feel there were any sort of key high risk areas that we sort of uncovered throughout our work to make you aware of. And also there's obviously no areas of significant risk where management essentially decided to accept the risk. So sometimes it can happen that we'll put forward a suggestion and management will say, thank you very much, but no thank you, we'll accept that risk. There were no instances of that at Herefordshire Council this year, but obviously we will bring that to attention if that is the case. Just in terms of some of the specifics of the paper, so I'm moving now down to page 195, and there's 2 paragraphs at the bottom of page 195. Just in terms of some of maybe the kind of specifics, and I think it's good that we've already touched on both of these as part of the annual governance statement, which obviously the intention is that these 2 documents kind of broadly align or at least inform each other. One just in relation to risk management, which I know we've discussed already today. Just the fact that obviously SWAP supports the kind of current sort of refresh or planned refresh of risk management arrangements at the council. I know Amy is providing some sort of support and advisory work as part of that work. Obviously something that we're keen to see up and running and sort of into a rhythm as soon as possible, including through to this committee, which I think it was mentioned that it was coming to next month's committee, which is a positive, but just to raise that. The second area is the follow-up of internal audit actions. Again, I've picked this up on the bottom of page 195. I believe obviously this committee used to receive a 6-monthly report of all internal audit recommendations or actions. I think that process has kind of ceased due to kind of levers from within the council. But we're really keen to see that reinvigorated, and we're hopeful actually that we can facilitate a sort of improved system of that and bring that to you. And again, hopefully use our system audit board to give you sort of live access, so you can get better oversight of where exactly all actions are, and you can split that by directorate, for example. So we're hopeful that'll be an improvement. As Amy referenced in her update, we've obviously included a section on internal audit performance. That's another key area that we tend to include in our annual opinion. So we're on page 196 for this. A main indicator for us is always customer feedback. So obviously at the end of each audit we seek feedback from the key audit stakeholders, and we ask a sort of broad range of questions. And good to see that the sort of feedback that we continue to receive is broadly positive, and nice to hear as well with Roger, even in those audits where we sometimes have to deliver difficult messages or areas where we need to bring reports to the Audit and Governance Committee, actually we still receive sort of positive feedback, and I think most people are broadly happy for internal audit to work with them and appreciate some of the value that we can bring. Other than that, again, just the opportunity to highlight that we continue to conform against our own sort of professional standards. So they're set by the Institute of Internal Auditors and the SIPFA sort of public sector internal audit standards. We will be having a scheduled external assessment of our whole internal audit services later this year. So that's a planned assessment. We'll obviously bring results back to this committee, and also to flag that our professional standards are undergoing a bit of a change this year. So we're actually going to have another external assessment next year under the new standards, and again we'll keep you updated on that. Other than that, we've got a summary of our work that informs the opinion on pages 197 and 198. Again, I think we've touched on how we like to sort of visualise the coverage of our work against kind of key areas of the council. But actually, I think that's probably an area for improvement for us, that as risk management develops, we need to become more sort of smart at sort of aligning our work with key strategic risks of the authority. Happy to expand on any area, Chair, or take any questions. Thank you.
Very much. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Rupert. Two things. One is, how are you planning to align audits with risk? Because it's not a one-to-one, is it? It's a one-to-many and overlapping and all over the place. So how are you hoping to present that in a way that we'll be able to consume? And the other one was going back to my favourite chart on page 196 with your surveys. We're in a season now of polling, aren't we? Everybody's been polled and everyone's surveyed. So on these surveys, you've got 23 issued. So does that imply, is that just a random sample from everyone who's been involved with an audit in the last 12 months or in the current year, or is it only new people who haven't been surveyed last time? This is brand new people. So how are you going to do it year on year? How do you figure out who to target out of those 23 issued? How did you choose them?
Thank you very much. Good question. So typically for each, and it tends to be each assurance piece of work that we carry out. So each audit, there'll tend to be a sort of a key stakeholder. So for example, Roger would be the key stakeholder for the sort of DBID work. So following the work, we would send Roger a questionnaire. So this is a 12-month view. So it's a rolling 12-month view. So for some pieces of work, we won't issue a post-audit questionnaire. So for example, if we've sat on a project board, for example, and provided sort of a small bit of advice, we wouldn't necessarily issue a questionnaire. However, we try and issue a questionnaire wherever we can to get as much feedback as we can. So it will be for each piece of audit work we carry out, we'll contact the key stakeholder. They may have worked with audit before, they may have not worked with audit before, but it's really a view from each and every audit to try and get sort of feedback and make sure essentially we're adding value, which is the key area that we're focusing on really. And sorry, your first question around, which was a good one, around how do we cover strategic risks that there might not necessarily be a linkage, and it's a really good point, and some will have a kind of a strong link. So for example, if there is a cybersecurity risk on the risk register, we might be able to do an audit of overall how does the authority protect itself in terms of cybersecurity arrangements. For some of them, it might be, and again, I'm making up risks here, but corporate governance or something like that, a huge area that you might not be able to necessarily do an audit of. So we'll sort of link our work to that area, but we'll make clear that we're not providing full coverage of the authority's corporate governance. That we will say in our scope, we've looked at decision making, or to pick up the chair's point, we've looked at the risk section of reports and how they're articulated and how effective that is, for example. So you're right, not all audits will have a one-to-one relationship, but we'll still try and make the linkages where we can, just to give you an idea.
Follow up on that. So would you anticipate that for every audit there should be a related risk?
Hopefully, yes, but there will be some very specific piece of work. For example, grant certifications that we're often asked to do as auditors. So that specific grant won't feature on certainly the strategic risk register. It might feature on a service risk register, but it may not. So ideally, we'd link all our work to kind of the key risks and priorities, but there will be some work on request that we're asked, can you sign off this transport grant for £200,000? So it's not a key risk, but actually it's part of our role that we're asked to by central government have some independent eyes on the grant money and its spending. So we'll also carry out work like that.
So Rupert, going back to page 195, and this is the follow-up of agreed actions. Seems to me there's a bit of risk that lots of things are going to fall between the cracks. There's going to be a cavern rather than a crack. So there's a list of actions which we've seen some time ago, and one of the comments was that some of these are pretty irrelevant because they're very long, which may partly resulted in this action now. But there are some actions which will be presumably still relevant. You're looking forward to new audits and new actions, but what's going to happen to that large wedge in the middle where actions, is that your responsibility or is that the council's responsibility? Because I know you say this process has now ceased, so it rather sounds as if those which are in the middle have all, we're not going to get a report on those, which I think is a problem.
Yes, no, just to provide you some reassurance that we met with the team that previously did that, and we have got the record from them. So we will be loading, or we have loaded all of those into our system. You're right, though, that some of those are very historical. So I do think there's a worthwhile exercise going through those and going, do we really, is there value really still in some of these that are 5 years old and processes have moved on, individuals have moved on? But we'll come to a kind of risk-based view on each and every one of them, but hopefully bring you an updated but perhaps sanitized version, so it's not hundreds and hundreds, and
that would be helpful. Is that going to be for the next meeting, do you think, which is 6 weeks away, something like that? Is that too quick a time scale for you to do that?
I believe that's the plan.
Excellent.
I think that's on the agenda for next meeting. That's certainly what we're working to. Right. So we'll try and have that for the July meeting.
Good, thank you. Robert?
Yes, so when you assess risk, it's my experience, because I've run risk studies myself, identifying the risk isn't so difficult. It's weighing the value of each risk against the benefits. Do you have a specific process or a scientific approach to how you do that?
And sorry, just to throw the question back to you slightly in terms of identifying the risks at the outset of the audit, in terms of that we're looking at, or at the end of the process in terms of maybe some of the findings and the resulting risk from those?
Well, you're auditing the way the county, the way the council is approaching its decisions on risk, and you're having a look at that and seeing whether that's appropriate, rational and sensible. So you must do your own risk analysis in parallel to ours to make sure that we have been sensible and rational about it. And it is as I said, I found when doing a big project that took a long time in my previous organisation, identifying the risk wasn't so hard. It was weighing each risk, and we evolved a matrix that helped us to weigh them? Do you use something like that? What sort of method do you use to assess the risks?
Yes, thank you. So you're right that obviously initially we would look towards officers in the council and ask them how they are managing their risk. In an ideal world, they would the risk that we're talking about would feature on a risk register, and there'd be controls against those risks. There'd be mitigating actions. Clearly, that's not always the case. Officers are pressed for time, or processes aren't in place. In that case, we would then come up with a list of sort of expected controls. So for each risk, like you say, the articulation of the risk is not always the hardest point. We would then come up with a list of expected controls to mitigate that risk if the service doesn't have that to sort of hand. And then we would formulate audit tests to test each one of those controls and then give a view on the effectiveness of those controls. So there's no sort of set number that it might be there's 3 key controls that would mitigate that risk, or it could be there's 30 key controls that mitigate that risk. But we would devise audit tests for each one of those controls, and then obviously through conversations, through testing, through data analytics and documentation, we'd come to a view in terms of are those controls operating effectively, and therefore is the risk being managed effectively. Does that answer? I feel like that's not quite answered your question, but hopefully given you.
Thank you. No, I think it's a good attempt. It's a complex subject, and it's something that took a committee that I chaired 2 years to come to what we felt was a good way of weighing the risks that we'd identified. You could have a brainstorming session of 2 hours with a group and identify all the risks. It took weeks, months sometimes to actually measure the weight of those risks and balance those against the benefits. That was the hard part, and we needed a way of doing that in a systematic manner and not just plucking a I feel that's okay sort of idea. That's no good at all. So I think you've done the best to answer it, and maybe I'll follow up later with the council and see how the officers do this, because that's probably even more important. Thank you.
Peter. Yeah.
Chair, to pick up on Councillor Highfield's point, so that's the probability and the impact matrices that we have in our methodology to try and give that standardisation and that ability. So it's measured across a number of things: financial, operational, and so on and so forth. The impact.
Any more questions? I'm just going to ask one more. Then on page 199, Rupert, anything which has got lots of red gets my attention. I started trying to understand this. So HC de-escalated. Everything here is de-escalated, which means to me it's no longer on the risk register. And I'm getting lots of heads, so I'm doing all right so far. Because I looked at the risk register as at the end of Q3, and none of them that are on this list are in here. So are all these irrelevant? 'Cause it says at the bottom, which shows the authority strategic risk register was significantly updated in March. And so you've done this page based on the old risk register, which is no longer relevant. Is that? Sorry.
We have, but there is logic. There's method to our madness there. That obviously, like I say, this is a retrospective annual opinion. So how do we provide the opinion as at sort of today's date? Obviously, our work wouldn't have mapped to those risks. We didn't know about them because it was updated in sort of March, April. So no, you're absolutely right that it's. And again, apologies. It's in some ways it's not a helpful graphic, but hopefully it's that retrospective look that our work in sort of 23-24, that was the mapping to the risks that existed at the time in 23-24.
So I needn't be worried about this really.
No, I think it's. But you're right that we obviously put the red in there for that reason, that it draws your attention to it. And I think going forwards, it is, when you see that there's no coverage against a strategic risk, and hopefully a refreshed strategic risk register that's regularly updated. Yeah. It's hopefully for the Audit and Governance Committee to say, where are we getting our assurance that risks in that area are being effectively sort of managed and mitigated. But no, thank you. It's a good question.
Okay, so we note the report and accept the assurances provided by the annual opinion report. All those happy with that? Okay, so thank you very much. The work programme, Jen has provided an update. I think it's one each. Yeah. So, I mean, this is just for information to let you know where things are covered. You'll note from July there's an internal audit progress report, including update on audit actions, and again that's repeated in October. So I'm pleased to see that. And in October we got the governance statement progress report on actions, so that's repeated. And we've got the big celebration on the 24th of September with the sign-off of the accounts. Well, I think we should have some special biscuits on that day, Frank. Oh, yeah, well, I'll speak to Mrs. H about that sometime. Okay, so this is just for information and to note, yeah. Okay, well, there's the final item is dates of future meetings, which are all listed in the agenda. Are members of the committee content with the proposed dates? Polly, we look forward to seeing you on as many of these as possible. So I'll draw the meeting. Okay. I will close the meeting, and can the live stream be stopped, please?